Thank you all so much for having me. Um, I want to talk today a little bit about the work that we do at Dreaming Out Loud, but more so, I want to connect it to the work and the passion that you all are putting behind climate justice, food justice, and those intersections with different parts of our lives and our national life and our global life. Um, Dreaming Out Loud, you can tell by the name, we didn't start out in food. We began teaching character and leadership development to children, youth here in DC using art, media, and the environment. So the environment and climate has always been close to us. But as we got started, we were doing projects, helping to maintain trails in some of our national parks in Ward 7 here in the district. Who all's from DC, lives in DC, a little bit familiar with DC geography? Okay, so we do have some familiar folks. For those who don't know, Ward 7 is a primarily African-American community, about 95%. 75,000 people live there, but there are only 2 grocery stores. So as we were getting started, doing environmental projects, working with youth on the ground and in community, we noticed something that was equally as troubling as the concerns around the environment. And it was very soon that we started to see that they were linked. We had kids coming to our after-school program who only had Kool-Aid and Teddy Grahams for snack. So if you could imagine having a room full of 3rd graders or 2nd graders, it was quite the task to get through an art project or an environmental project with that much sugar. So we started thinking about how we could reach youth at a different level, and we were working with kids in the mayor's summer youth employment program, and we had kids working from different sites, maintaining parks and trails, installing CFL bulbs on folks' porches, and really getting immersed in the environment. And then there we go again, the kids would come with honey buns and Arizona iced tea for breakfast. And this issue kept popping up everywhere we went, everywhere we went. There was no healthy food options in the neighborhood, so we couldn't be mad at the kids. And so we started to think about, what can we do? What little impact can we have on the ground where we are that can make the situation just a little bit better? And we ended up starting a farmer's market. And it was very soon that we noticed that some of the issues that we saw with the kids that some of our farmers faced in terms of being able to earn a living wage, being able to afford healthy food themselves, being able to provide for their families. And folks would come up to us at the markets and tell us things like that, I want job training, where can I get a job? I have a business, how can I get started? Where can I plug in? We began to think about how we can make a difference in a way beyond food access and food, health, nutrition. And we began to think about what assets were in the community, how we could begin to address these things, and what impacts intersected between the climate and food. We had farmers that, used to be able to predict what they were gonna plant and what was gonna come up when. But as things got hotter, it became harder for us to tell people what was gonna be at the market the next week. It began to be harder to predict how much crops were gonna come out of the ground for the farmers to be able to make a living and keep their farms. And we started to see that all of these things were very much connected. And as we were doing our research and going around and meeting people and finding out folks doing this work in other places around the country and around the world, one of the folks that we were inspired by was a woman by the name of Karen Washington. She was living in New York and started a gardening club in her neighborhood, and she began to think about how she could bring folks together around some of the same issues that we're talking about, and she started a convening called the Black Urban Growers and Farmers Conference, or BUGS. And one of the things that Karen Washington talks about, she began to shift the language about what food justice really was. And she coined this term called food apartheid, right? And the reason why she used this term is because she wanted to speak to the intentional construction around the circumstances that we were all seeing in our neighborhoods. They weren't naturally occurring, it wasn't a natural occurrence that there were no grocery stores in Ward 7, that the unemployment rates were, 4 or 5 times as high in Ward 7 as you would find in Ward 4 or Ward 3. These things were intentional. And so we started to think about what other systems had been intentionally constructed at the intersections of race, at the intersections of economics and gender and class. And so our work began to expand and our thinking began to expand. And so we started to think about, well, what does the intentional reconstruction look like? What does it look like to be intentional and inclusive in what the new system looks like? And what hard conversations we have to have at the intersection of these subjects? And what assets do we have on the ground in communities to address them? And so for us, as we moved along, we did a lot of community organizing, having listening sessions, talking to folks about what does the next thing look like, what does the community need? And in that work, we ended up finding a space behind Kelly Miller Middle School and Lincoln Heights, which is one of the largest public housing communities in the city, to get started on a different solution, a community-based solution called the Farm and Food Hub at Kelly Miller, where we grow healthy food. We also help to distribute healthy food to the community and community-based partners who want to take back food sovereignty and control of their food system. And then we also, in addition to that, began a food entrepreneurship program called Dreaming Out Loud's Ready for Entrepreneurship Accelerator Modules, which is really long, but when you shorten it to a cute little acronym, we get DREAM, or the DREAM program. And so we've been working really hard on not only providing folks, the technical skills to take their interest to the next level, but having the conversations about what those barriers are for folks who are not able to take those next steps. Here in DC, in the Washington area metro region, white wealth is 81 times that of black wealth, right? 81 times. So if you find a young mother in Lincoln Heights or in Ward 8 somewhere who has a business that she wants to get started, she doesn't have the economic floor to take those next steps. Whatever she can cobble together herself, what her community might be able to bring together to resource her, is not equitable to many of the entrepreneurs we see, popping up with storefronts or having products in stores. So we started to think about what those gaps were. Black women are some of the fiercest entrepreneurs in the country. They're doing the work in the communities. When we look at women's contributions overall in the food system, majority of the farmers are women. Most of the times when we, go out to meet a farmer who's growing some good healthy food and we want to get it into our community, we come across women and farmers and farms of people of color. And so we want to be able to intentionally reconstruct those linkages between rural folks who are growing healthy food, those folks that are in the community and want an ownership stake in the next new system. And we want to continue to have conversations with folks like you all about how we can all work to intentionally make choices that advance those goals and advances a vision where we're all included, where we have equity, whether that's across race, gender, class, and so many other areas. So, as we've spanned out and networked, we've linked with a lot of great farms, some in the immediate DC area in the community. The growers that we work with to get healthy food in the Ward 7 and also Ward 8 have come from near and far. We have regional partners like a 35-acre family-owned orchard in Pennsylvania has amazing apples that show up right there at Kelly Miller Middle School where families can come and shop after school. And we've been able to source from growers that are over 60% women and 70% people of color. Again, taking the intentional approach to be inclusive in solving some of the challenges, right? If folks need healthy food and we have community members who are are on the ground. How do we bridge the gap and connect those farmers to communities? This picture here is from our first cohort of the DREAM program. We have a collection of folks who started anywhere for businesses anywhere from catering to spices. We just launched our second cohort. We have African food, we have pasta, we have juices. We have folks who are formerly incarcerated. In our first cohort, Rayford, you can kind of see him in the back there. Just if you look straight back to the brick wall in the back. Rayford learned to make burritos while incarcerated using a disassembled iron and materials from the kitchen. So we have folks that are resourceful. But when it comes time to get licensed and progress through many of the systems that are in place to get a business started, there's a lot of barriers for folks who are formerly incarcerated. And so what we are is beyond the technical, ability to, find out how to get a loan. We want to find out what other types of challenges Rayford has in his day-to-day life that can help him to thrive, but also connect him with folks who are interested in supporting businesses like his, or like Miss Angela, who is now selling her products at the new sports and entertainment complex in Ward 8 that opened, that is the home of the Mystics and the Wizards practice facility. So we want to connect folks to these great opportunities that are, traditionally have been denied. Yeah, here's a list of some of the other community partners. We work with a lot of different people. We're grateful to connect with All Souls and other congregations and community centers and schools. We want to reach people where they're at, on the ground. But today, we want to talk a little bit more about climate change and what these linkages are. Sorry to bring it down with a little bit of doom and gloom, but have you all seen some of the things on the news recently? The Amazon has been on fire, nicknamed the lungs of the earth. When I first saw that, I wondered what could drive someone to want to set the Amazon on fire? How can you not see the value? Not just to folks who live there, but in a broader sense to the earth, to the world, to anybody who's breathing fresh air on this planet. The Amazon plays a role in filtering that air. I think I read somewhere it's about 20% of the world's oxygen is filtered through the Amazon. And so that leads us to a conversation about, the idea that profit over people in an economic system can drive us towards destructive ends, especially as it relates to the climate. And this has an effect on all people. Climate in the Amazon can impact climate here. Global issues are local. I was also reading where in NPR this morning, they have a series on climate change and how climate impacts those of us, the least among us, the first and the hardest. In the article, they talked about Baltimore and how the most intense heat in Baltimore is concentrated in the areas with the most poverty, right? So you then have folks who suffer additional illness because of that, which is an economic challenge. Folks lose wages going to the doctor. Folks lose time with their families. All those impact that same wealth gap that we're talking about, even on that incremental level, and not getting to the structural challenges that were put in place often long before many of us were born. We inherit systems. White supremacy is a system that we've all inherited. It's a weight on all of us. We deal with, structural oppression, whether that's connected to gender, to our sexual orientation, and economics. And it all has to do with systems that are unequally distributed in terms of power. Someone had the power to put the Amazon on fire. Someone had the power to exclude those indigenous folks who've been on that land from the decisions around that land, much the same that folks in our communities here in DC have been excluded in decisions about their equal access to healthy and fresh produce or the right to develop their economic lives. All of these things are connected. So I pulled up one of the maps of DC and its heat and income kind of index. And as I look, many of the census tracts where it's the hottest are actually where we drop off fresh produce, several times a week, that are suffering from double-digit unemployment, whose education systems have long underserved them, whose employment has been viewed as surplus labor. There have been grocery stores that have been making money, but because the profit over people mentality has led to decisions outside of the control of the community that those stores have left. And then again, driving those same challenges around health and economics and equity. So we want to not only tell the stories, we want to talk about that intentional construction and put some numbers behind it so that we can really see the depth of the challenges. And that's all because we want to put the power of food back into people's hands, back into the community hands. So that means training folks to grow healthy food. In many of our communities, there's a long legacy of agriculture dating back to, speaking to African American communities, before chattel slavery. We were farmers before we got here. We were also brought here because of our agricultural knowledge. And if you walk around DC communities and you talk to folks, you'll find that those legacies aren't as far as we often imagine that they are, or that they feel. If you talk to some of the kids and you ask, or their parents, and you ask, where are your grandparents from? Well, they're from North Carolina or South Carolina, places where those same agricultural legacies of rice growers, of yam farmers were deposited in the American South. And so that's why we feel it necessary when we're reconnecting those supply chain lines and using fancy language about how we can get healthy food to communities. We don't want to leave behind those stories that make the connections between culture and legacy and identity that can help folks to find a new resiliency, whether they're confronting food injustice or climate injustice, because it's all connected. And so finally, I just want to kind of reiterate that while we've inherited systems and legacies that impact everyone in a different way, we have to take some time in discussing that intentional construction to unpack the privileges that we inherit as well through those systems, and what levers of power, whether it's on the ground day to day, or you go to Congress and your job, or the mayor's office, what are those levers of power that we're afraid to let go of, that we're afraid to be challenged on? As a cisgendered heterosexual male, I have privilege relative to my team members who are Black women, right? So that requires me to do some work. How do I make decisions? How do I let go of power? How do I make sure that it's more democratic? Inside all of our institutions, we have to have those conversations. We all have some relative privilege that we need to examine and let go of and start that process. It's a hard conversation. Conversations of race make people uncomfortable sometimes. Conversations around sexual identity and gender identity and all of these things make people uncomfortable sometimes. But if we don't have those conversations, we're not going to take the next steps. And that all impacts our ability to survive on this planet together. You start to hear that timeline shrinking in the news recently, right? They used to say, we have 10 or 12 years. We have to be able to cap how much carbon we're putting out. And then every so often you hear that timeline shrinking. And the truth is, we don't know. We can guess, but there's one thing that we do know, that if we do nothing and we continue to push it back, the inevitable will happen. And the earth is still going to be here. It's been here a long time. Whether or not we're here is going to be the question. But none of us can do it alone. No community can do it alone, no organization, no individual. The common threads are what we have to begin to knit back together. When we're talking about that intentional construction around the things that divide us and the things that keep us from having equal access for all, we have to be equally as intentional around the reconstruction. And that requires everybody in this room. It requires tough conversations, it requires patience, it requires love. It requires relinquishing power. Because at the end of the day, everyone in this room, I don't see too many kids, too many children. I see a couple. Where are the young folks at? I see a couple. Raise your hand. Where are the young people? Yes. Whether 80 years young or 8 years young. Yes. What are we going to leave them? What legacies are we going to leave them? We've been impacted by the ones that our grandparents, our parents had to fight before us that may have given us just a little bit of daylight and a little bit of hope to keep on pushing. And we're at one of those inflection points. Climate is a metaphor. The heat and intensity around gentrification, the heat and intensity around our physical environment, the heat and intensity around the rhetoric that folks use when discussing immigrants. All of these things are a part of what's happening, right? To maintain the systems, to maintain the power. And for us, the question is, what are we going to do? How are you going to continue to organize? What do we have to let go of to let that other person in the room so that 5 becomes 10, becomes 15, becomes a movement, so that we can fix the environment, so that we can protect our undocumented folks, so that we can move economic justice forward? Those are the questions we have to ask ourselves. It's going to take some reading, it's going to take some study, but I think we have it in us. And more than an organization, Dreaming Out Loud is just the idea that we can have a radical re-envisioning of what that looks like. And that's why I wanted to really be here today, is to challenge you all and also invite you all. Challenge you all to, in your constituencies, in your church halls, in your clubs, to have these conversations. It's going to take some speaking truth to power, but I know you have it in you. And I also want to invite you all to plug into some of the work that we do, and we're connected to a lot of great folks that are doing work across the spectrum of moving this world forward in a better way. We have some materials over on the table if you'd ever like to have a birthday party catered by one of our Dream participants, if you'd like to come volunteer at the farm, or to come get some fresh produce. We have all those options to plug into. I just invite you into our world, and I thank you all for having me today, and I hope you find some inspiration in the work that we're doing and continue the fight. Thank you.